So today's topic is gumbo, which is one of the most fascinating dishes that you're ever going to come across. And in my opinion, this is the best stew that the United States has to offer. And there are so many different styles and varieties of gumbo out there. It's almost like everyone kind of has their own version and their own way of putting it together, which I think that's really cool. And we're going to go over a lot of that in this video. So not only have I prepared a great recipe for chicken and smoked sausage gumbo that you're going to love, I've also made this video into sort of a gumbo 101 course. And while there are a lot of other YouTube channels out there that have gumbo on their channel, unfortunately they kind of just give a recipe and nothing more than that. And unfortunately that presents gumbo as sort of a, rigid linear dish, and there's so much more to it than that, and it's so much more broad than that. So the cool thing is with this video, you're going to be able to see some different ways that it gets put together. You're going to be able to figure out what you like and what you want to try, and you're going to have your own version of gumbo. Because isn't that what cooking's all about? Being able to create things yourself and come up with your own ideas? Actually, the more I think about it, that is the best way to do things. So we've got a lot of work to do in this video, so what do you say we get to it? So while I mentioned in the intro that there are many different styles and types of gumbo that exist out there, there are also a few commonalities that exist between all of them. One of them being roux, which is a mixture of equal parts fat and flour by weight, and it's used to thicken sauces, soups, and stews. And I'm going to be using oil for the fat today, which is something that's more associated with Cajuns, as Creoles prefer to use butter for their roux. And contrary to what a lot of people say, not all gumbos are thickened with deep, dark brown roux. That's something more associated with Cajuns, as the term Cajun napalm would indicate. In fact, Creoles prefer a lighter colored roux, which is something called a blonde roux. And some people out there affiliate a dark brown roux with seafood gumbos and lighter colored roux with meat and poultry based gumbos. But that's also something that's not consistent across the board. And another thing that you're going to encounter in all gumbos is something called the holy trinity, which is 2 parts onion, 1 part celery, and 1 part bell pepper. And some people are kind of sticklers on it specifically being green bell peppers, and others aren't so much concerned about that. I actually have 1 of each here because I think a combination works best. But if you like one over the other, by all means use just 1. And for the chicken today, I'm going to be using boneless, skinless chicken thighs. You don't want to use breast here because breasts are likely to dry out. These are going to be cooking for about 30 minutes, so chicken thighs are the way to go. And for the sausage today, I've just got some regular supermarket smoked sausage. You can use whatever sausage you want, and actually in New Orleans, they use something called Andouille sausage, which is a spicy smoked pork sausage made from neck and stomach meat. The sausage itself actually originates in France, but it's pretty big down there in New Orleans. And I've also got some chicken stock here. If you're making a seafood gumbo, you probably want to use seafood stock. And I've also got something called filet powder, or gumbo filet powder, which is ground up sassafras. And there's a specific way that you use this too, and I'll get to this later in the video. And of course, it's all served with rice, and this is just regular long grain white rice, so nothing special here. Okay, we're gonna start things off by getting our vegetables ready. So for the bell peppers, I'm only using 1/2 of each pepper, so 1 whole bell pepper in total. And after removing the inner rib section of each half, I'm going for a slightly larger dice, somewhere in the range of 3/4 of an inch. Cutting them too small will likely result in them turning into mush, as they are going to be simmering for a little bit. And for the celery, starting with 2 to 3 stalks, depending on their thickness, cut the long pieces in half to make them easier to work with, then cut those pieces down further the long way, and again, a larger dice is preferred here, so 3/4 of an inch is ideal. And finally, for the onions, either use 2 small onions or 1 large onion, and after splitting them pole to pole, lay the cut side down and make horizontal cuts followed up by vertical cuts with each of them spaced 3/4 of an inch apart, and finally cut down through both of those cuts to get your diced onion. And now on to the sausage. I'm going for a larger cut here as well, so anywhere in the range of 3/4 to 1 inch cubes will work here, and of course alternatively you could cut them into discs if that's what you want. And the last bit of knife work here will be the chicken, and it's important to give a look through the pieces first because many of them will have small bone fragments or little pieces of cartilage that need to be removed. So after removing all of that, I'm going to cut these pieces larger than the rest of the ingredients. I'm going for roughly 1.5 inches or so on these. I wouldn't go much smaller than that because even though thigh meat is harder to overcook, smaller pieces can still dry out fairly easily inside of a stew. And just for a reference here, I did find multiple unwanted fragments inside these pieces, so make sure to look for these. Okay, with our mise en place out of the way now, let's go over a couple of different options that you have as far as making your own gumbo. And the first thing to point out here is that the word gumbo itself translates to okra in several West African languages. So it is a West African food, and okra was the original thickener. And I did mention a couple of things that they all have in common: the holy trinity, roux, and they're all served with rice. But there are also a couple of thickening options, one of them obviously being okra, and the other one being filet powder, which is what I'm going to be using today. And this was something that was introduced by the Choctaw Indians, and it is ground up sassafras. And filet powder is generally used at the table. You don't cook it into the soup itself because it will either gel at the bottom of the pot or turn stringy, so you don't want to cook filet powder. And because of the fact that these two flavors aren't really compatible, these are essentially two different types of gumbo. There are okra gumbos and there are filet gumbos. So give them both a shot and see which one you like more. And while we're at it, I also want to point out a dish that's called gumbo zaïrbe. And this is gumbo that's made with greens, and it's typically served during Lent. So for you vegetarians out there that want to give something like this a shot, this might be the dish for you. So next up, we need to make a spice mix, and for that, combine 3/4 of a teaspoon of paprika with 1/2 teaspoon each of oregano, thyme, and basil, and finally 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Give that a stir to combine, and with that, we're ready to start cooking. And while a cast iron Dutch oven is traditional for gumbo, any large soup pot will do as long as it has a thick base like you see here. So with that, set the heat between medium and high, and while that heats up, let's get our chicken ready. Start by liberally seasoning the pieces with salt, and make sure you give everything a good mix so that all the pieces are well seasoned. And we're going to follow that up with 1/2 of the spice mixture from a moment ago. And again, mix that in thoroughly as well. And the final step before heading back over to the stove top is to lightly dust the pieces with all-purpose flour, and this is called dredging. And this is not only going to help to prevent the chicken from sticking to the pan, it's also going to help thicken up the consistency of the stew as well. And with that, let's head back over to the stove top and add all 3 ounces of oil to the pot and follow that up with the chicken pieces. And the most important thing here is not to overcrowd the pot. I'm going to be working in 2 batches, and adding too many pieces at once will prevent the chicken from browning up properly, so work with this accordingly. Give the pieces a flip once they're well browned on one side, and repeat the same thing on the second side. Then finish out the remaining chicken pieces after that. And once you've got all of the chicken browned up, take them out of the pot and set them aside for the moment, and let's turn our attention to the sausage. And again, if necessary, work in batches here as well, but I've actually got enough space at the bottom of my pot to do this all in one batch, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And we don't want to scorch the sausage here. A light browning on all sides will work just fine. And I'd say these are looking pretty good right here, so they can be taken out of the pot right now. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that tongs probably weren't the best choice of tool for this particular task. A slotted spoon might work a little bit better, but you know, whatever, it eventually gets the job done. And with the sausage finished up, go ahead and toss in all of the vegetables and add a hefty amount of salt to these as well. And I know I've mentioned this several times on the channel before, but it is very important to season the foods at every step throughout the cooking process. And proper seasoning is actually one of the biggest differences between professionals and novices when it comes to cooking. Now, after about 5 minutes of cooking, these should be softened up and we can work in the flour to make roux. Now, if you're wanting to make the Cajun style dark brown roux, you'd want to either pull out the vegetables or prepare the roux in a separate pot, because the water in the vegetables will prevent the roux from browning up properly. I'm going for a blondish roux here, which is more of a Creole style roux, and this one only takes a couple of minutes of cooking. And while I'm at it, I'll toss in the other half of the spice mixture from earlier, because lightly toasting this will contribute flavor as well. And after a minute or two of toasting all of this stuff up, we can start combining everything back together. So the chicken and the sausage can go back into the pot, and we can start working in 6 cups of chicken stock. And do this gradually while stirring to prevent the formation of lumps. And a handy ratio to keep in the back of your head if you want to make a larger or a smaller batch of gumbo is that 1 pound of roux will thicken up 1 gallon of liquid, and on a smaller scale, 1 ounce of roux will thicken 1 cup of liquid. And last but not least, the final step here is to add some salt along with 2 bay leaves, then bring the pot up to a boil before reducing the heat down to a gentle simmer for 30 minutes. So when researching into the cuisines of Louisiana, you've almost certainly encountered the terms Cajun and Creole. And while unfortunately outside of the state, they've sort of lost some of their meaning due to corporations and businesses kind of using them as throwaway canned marketing terms to help sell their shit, you yourself might be asking the question, Who are these people that call themselves Cajuns, and who are the ones that call themselves Creoles? Well, the term Cajun is derived from the word Acadian, which refers to people that were from an area of northeast Canada that was known as Acadia, which is present-day New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And in the mid-1700s, the British took control of this land, and many Acadians refused to swear their allegiance to the British government. So as a result, they were forced from their homes and deported, and many of them landed in southwest Louisiana. So these are country folk, and the type of cooking that they're affiliated with is known as country cooking, and their foods are a little bit more spicy than their Creole counterparts due to the generous use of hot peppers. And a couple of culinary contributions that came from Cajuns would be crawfish or shrimp etouffee, jambalaya, dirty rice, and of course dark brown roux, which is used in some gumbos. And for Creoles, the term Creole is derived from the word criollo, which is a Portuguese word meaning native to a region. And this refers to people that were born in New Orleans that were of European descent, mainly French and Spanish. And while this was the original meaning of the term, it did evolve to be much more broad than that. There were black Creoles, there were white Creoles, there are Caribbean Creoles, there are people from the West Indies that are called Creoles. There are all kinds of people that call themselves Creoles. But originally, when the Spanish controlled the Louisiana territory, many upper class and wealthy people from Europe came to the city of New Orleans. So Creoles are city folk, and some people say that their cooking is a little bit more sophisticated than their Cajun counterparts, and obviously it's heavily influenced by European style cooking and sauces. And a couple of their culinary contributions would be oysters Rockefeller, beignets, and bananas Foster. Okay, jumping back into it, the gumbo is simmering nicely, so let's get our rice ready, and the first step for making long grain rice usually is to rinse off the excess surface starch, but an alternative option is to cook it off. So with 12 ounces of rice in a pot, I'll add a few splashes of olive oil and cook this over low heat for 5 minutes or so while stirring to make sure that all of the grains have a chance to make contact with the bottom of the pot to toast off all of their starches. And this method of cooking rice is called a rice peel-off, and once all of the grains are toasted off, toss in 24 ounces of water. So the ratio for water to rice is 2 to 1 by weight. So add a few pinches of salt, and an easy way to check for seasoning is to taste the water as it heats up. It should taste slightly salty because the salt concentration is going to be diluted into the rice as it cooks. So if you're slightly on the salty side now, that's a good thing because it will come into the correct range when it finishes cooking. And when the water reaches a full boil, turn the heat down or move the pot to another burner that's set to low, place a lid on top and simmer it gently for 15 minutes. And after that 15 minutes, take the pot off the heat and leave it covered for another 5 minutes. And this method works for any long grain white rice, so that's another trick to hang on to in your back pocket. And after the 5 minutes is up, take the lid off and use a fork to gently fluff the rice up, and that's it. The rice is ready to go, so let's check back in on the gumbo. It's been simmering over here for about 30 minutes, and I'd say it's looking pretty good, so what do you say we get this thing plated up? Start with a serving bowl of your choosing, then place a hefty amount of rice into the center of the bowl, and since the gumbo is going to be pooled around the rice, it does help to kind of form the rice into a cohesive shape that will hold together. And after you've got your rice figured out, grab the gumbo pot and simply ladle the stew around the rice. And as far as the filet powder goes, now would be the time to sprinkle a little bit of that in. And I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and hopefully I've cleared up some questions you might have had within the galaxy of gumbo. But for now, we've reached the end of the video, so as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.